What if the Nazis had actually built the Horten HO-229 jet flying wing? Introduction: a glimpse into a forgotten innovation. In the final years of World War II, as Allied bombers darkened the skies over Europe, Germany raced to develop radical technologies that could turn the tide. Among the most mysterious and futuristic of these efforts was the Horten HO-229, a jet-powered flying wing designed by the Horten brothers, Reimar and Walter. This aircraft, cloaked in myths and speculation, has since captured the imagination of historians and aviation enthusiasts alike. But what if the Nazis had fully developed and mass-produced the HO-229? Would it have altered the course of the war? Let's dive into the history, technology, and alternate outcomes of one of Nazi Germany's most advanced experimental weapons. The Horten brothers, innovators ahead of their time. Reimar and Walter Horten were German aviation pioneers who began designing aircraft in the early 1930s. Their work, which spanned until the end of World War II, was centered around one radical idea: the flying wing. Unlike traditional aircraft, their designs eliminated the conventional fuselage and tail, reducing drag and radar signature, concepts that were far ahead of their time. Although often described as visionaries, the Horten brothers were not unmatched aeronautical geniuses. Their designs were evolutionary, not revolutionary, incremental refinements of a core idea. In total, they created around 44 aircraft based on a dozen distinct designs, ranging from gliders to experimental jets. The birth of the HO-229, jet power meets flying wing. In 1940, Luftwaffe pilot Walter Horten, fresh off his success as a Battle of Britain ace, proposed something daring: to equip one of their flying wing gliders with jet engines. His brother Reimar, the design mastermind, took on the technical challenge. Walter, who had risen through Luftwaffe ranks, helped secure resources by leveraging his military position. Their first powered prototype, the HO-9, was intended to use two BMW 003 jet engines. However, due to performance issues, they switched to Junkers Jumo 004B engines, the same ones used in the infamous Messerschmitt Me 262. Test flights and fatal setback. The second prototype, the HO-9V2, with full jet propulsion, managed to fly 3 times. Tragically, the third test flight ended in disaster when one of the engines failed mid-air, causing a fatal crash. With the war nearing its end, the project stalled, and the aircraft never reached production. What if it had been completed and deployed? Had the HO-229 been mass-produced and deployed by the Luftwaffe, several critical factors would have shaped its impact. Speed and stealth. The HO-229 was designed to fly faster than any Allied aircraft and had a reduced radar signature, perhaps the first real attempt at a stealth aircraft. Production limitations. Nazi Germany was already suffering from severe shortages of materials, fuel, and trained pilots. Even with the HO-229, scaling production and deployment would have been extremely difficult. Operational impact. If used in limited numbers, the HO-229 may have served as an advanced interceptor or bomber, potentially disrupting Allied bombing runs. But it was unlikely to turn the war's tide without accompanying breakthroughs in tactics, logistics, and strategic planning. Legacy and modern influence. Though the HO-229 never saw combat, its design principles heavily influenced post-war aircraft development. Northrop Grumman's B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, for instance, bears a striking resemblance to the Horten design, a testament to how forward-thinking the concept was. After the war, the Horten brothers fled to Argentina, where they continued working on aircraft in relative obscurity. Their legacy remains controversial, visionaries to some, opportunists to others, but their role in aviation history is undeniable. The first turbojet flying wing, a leap ahead of its time. Though it never went beyond prototype testing, the Horten HO-9V2 holds a unique place in aviation history. It was the world's first turbojet-powered flying wing to take flight. In March 1945, 3.5 years before Jack Northrop's YB-49 would leave the ground, the HO-9V2 briefly roared into the sky. It was a fleeting triumph, but a significant one. In several critical aspects, the Horten brothers had beaten Northrop to the punch. Yet Northrop himself refused to acknowledge this. After the war, when someone suggested that he consider hiring the Horten brothers, his dismissive response was, "Forget it, they're just glider designers." When pressed about the success of the HO-9, he brushed it off as a Gotha design, not a Horten. Northrop was wrong. Who really built the HO-229? The confusion stems from the project's late-war transition. The Luftwaffe recognized that the Horten's modest workshop was incapable of mass-producing twin-engine jet fighter bombers. As a result, the project was transferred to Gotha Wagenfabrik, a large industrial firm with experience building aircraft. This led to a tangle of designations. The prototype that flew was the HO-9 V2, but the German Air Ministry, ARM, later assigned the official designation HO-229. Since Gotha handled production, some sources mistakenly refer to the aircraft as the HO-229. However, this contradicts standard Luftwaffe naming practices. Messerschmitts remained Me, and Heinkel's stayed He, regardless of the manufacturing plant. Therefore, HO-229 is a misnomer, albeit a persistent one. Today, the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum refers to its unrestored aircraft as a Horten 229, though in reality, it's the unfinished HO-9 V3, built under Gotha's supervision and never flown. Flying wings, not a Horten or Northrop invention. Despite popular belief, neither the Horten brothers nor Jack Northrop invented the flying wing. The concept dates back to the early 20th century. By the late 1920s, aviation pioneers had already experimented with tailless, all-wing designs to the extent that the configuration was briefly considered passé. So while both the Hortens and Northrop advanced the concept significantly, they were entering a field that had already seen decades of exploration. What made their contributions unique was not the idea, but how far they took it with available technology, especially when it came to jet propulsion. Stealth claims. Fact or fiction? One of the most controversial claims about the HO-9 is that it was the world's first stealth fighter. This idea gained traction among conspiracy theorists and fans of Nazi wonder weapons, but the reality is far murkier. In 2009, a Northrop Grumman-funded documentary titled Hitler's Stealth Fighter aired on National Geographic and History Channel. The program featured a replica of the HO-9 V3, built for $250,000 by Northrop Grumman's prototyping shop, and subjected it to radar testing. The replica showed some degree of radar deflecting characteristics, but nothing close to modern stealth standards. Critics have pointed out that the documentary, and the stealth claims it propagated, play more into historical myth-making than hard engineering evidence. As some aviation historians joke, many of Nazi Germany's late-war aircraft designs emerged from what they call the Napkenwaffe, named after the speculative designs scrawled on napkins that never reached combat readiness. The Horten jet, while impressive, only narrowly escapes that category. Debunking the stealth myth. The reality behind the replica. In 2009, Northrop Grumman constructed a full-scale replica of the Horten HO-9 V3 for a documentary titled Hitler's Stealth Fighter. The goal: test whether the Horten design possessed any credible stealth capabilities. The result was dramatic, but also misleading. Unlike the original aircraft, the replica was built entirely of wood. Its outer skin consisted of plywood bonded with carbon-impregnated glue, said to be radar-absorbent. Aside from the instrument panel backing and compressor discs, both metal and radar-reflective, virtually every component was optimized to reduce radar return. But here's the problem: this version was far from historically accurate. Missing metal and missing truth. The original HO-9 V3 had a vastly different structure. Its 11-foot wide center section was constructed from welded steel tubing, and it housed two fully operational turbojet engines, both of which contained significant quantities of metal. These elements were entirely absent from the replica. Even more telling, the replica omitted the aircraft's 8 aluminum fuel tanks, as well as the underwing-mounted bombs the actual warplane would have carried for combat operations. Both additions, fuel systems and exposed ordnance, would have significantly degraded any stealth signature. Bombs mounted externally, in particular, would have eliminated any potential radar-evading advantage. Would it have fooled British radar? The documentary speculated that a wooden Horten might have slipped past Britain's chain home radar network, a low-frequency system developed in the 1930s. While technically possible in theory, the idea that such a flyby would result in successful bombing missions is implausible. Without internal bomb bays or optimized stealth geometry, the aircraft would have been easily visible to improved Allied radar systems by 1945, and even more vulnerable once its bombs were loaded externally. The charcoal glue claim, stealth or revisionist memory. The centerpiece of the stealth claim rests on a single statement by Raymar Horten, made decades after the war. In a 1983 memoir, written after U.S. stealth technology like the F-117 was becoming publicly known, Raymar claimed that the aircraft's plywood sheathing was to be bonded using glue mixed with radar-absorbing charcoal. There is, however, no wartime documentation or testimony from anyone involved in the construction of the prototypes to support this. The claim appears nowhere in original blueprints, engineering notes, or official Luftwaffe records. It's worth noting that many of the so-called stealth properties of the HO-9 were only discussed after stealth became a known quantity in the aerospace world, suggesting that Raymar may have retroactively embellished the design's capabilities. Testing the myth, science versus speculation. To get to the truth of the Horten stealth legend, we must move beyond speculative documentaries and look at what the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, NASM, actually discovered. Their restoration team conducted a battery of advanced tests, digital microscopy, X-ray diffraction, and Fourier transform spectroscopy, on the wing structure of the museum's Horten prototype. The results were definitive. No carbon or charcoal was found in the glue. The dark flecks previously believed to be radar-absorbing particles were nothing more than oxidized wood. The stealth narrative, it turns out, was built on a misinterpretation. Aluminum, plywood, and wartime pragmatism. In fact, Raymar Horten had originally intended to cover the aircraft in aluminum, which is highly reflective to radar. This alone suggests stealth was never part of the original design objectives. The shift to plywood came later, and not because of radar concerns, but because of wartime scarcity. When Raymar learned that the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, a rocket-powered interceptor, used plywood effectively, he chose the material out of necessity, not innovation. The decision was practical, not tactical. Plywood was easier to obtain, easier to work within their small-scale workshop, and sufficient for their design speeds. In short, stealth had nothing to do with it. The mission, speed and agility, not invisibility. Let's be clear about what the HO-229 was actually meant to be. It was conceived as a fast-day fighter, specifically a bomber interceptor, not a deep-penetration stealth bomber. Walter Horten, a seasoned fighter pilot, had strong views on the shortcomings of contemporary German aircraft. He believed the Focke-Wulf FW-190 was prone to dangerous spins and wanted to build a better, more stable, and more maneuverable fighter. There was no operational requirement for radar evasion. The idea that stealth would be a priority, when the HO-229's mission profile didn't even call for radar confrontation, is purely the product of hindsight and fantasy. Why the stealth fighter myth persisted. So how did the Hitler's stealth fighter myth take hold? In part, it owes its longevity to post-war fascination with Luftwaffe wonder weapons, a class of futuristic, often barely functional German designs that have been romanticized far beyond their actual impact. Among model builders, alternative history enthusiasts, and war gamers, these designs offer a tantalizing glimpse of what might have been. But what these communities often overlook is the hard reality of aerospace development. Sophisticated aircraft don't go from drawing board to battlefield in weeks. The Messerschmitt Me-262, Nazi Germany's first operational jet fighter, took over 3 years from first flight to combat readiness. Following that same schedule, the HO-229 wouldn't have seen combat until early 1948, 3 years after the war ended. The harsh realities of a garage-built jet. It's also important to remember the extremely limited production capabilities of the Horten brothers. The first prototypes, the HO-9 V1 and V2, were assembled in what amounted to a 3-car garage. Much of the structural material was non-airworthy, including household-grade plywood and steel tubing more commonly used for electrical conduit. The aircraft's appearance may have looked advanced, but underneath, it was a hand-built prototype, lacking the industrial rigor needed for sustained frontline use. The question of professionalism: how capable were the Hortens? While the Horten brothers are often remembered as visionary designers, a closer inspection reveals a more nuanced truth. Their engineering was imaginative and forward-looking, but also deeply flawed, sometimes even amateurish. Take, for example, the story of the HO-9 V2 center of gravity, CG. Walter Horten was responsible for calculating the aircraft's CG, an essential measurement that determines the plane's flight stability. A steel measuring tape. Unfortunately, he failed to notice that the first 10 centimeters of the tape were missing. As a result, the aircraft was misbalanced and required substantial ballast in the nose to compensate. On its first flight, the test pilot struggled to keep the aircraft airborne, holding full backstick just to stay level. When he attempted to flare on landing, the misaligned CG caused the plane to slam into the runway, badly damaging the landing gear. It was a basic error and a glaring sign of lax engineering discipline, welding errors and material mishandling. Another example of questionable professionalism occurred during the repeated modifications of the aircraft's center section. As the engine configuration switched back and forth between BMW 003S and Jumo 004BS, the Hortens team welded and re-welded the core fuselage structure, a practice that introduced serious heat stress and structural weakness. Experienced aircraft manufacturers would have cut out and replaced compromised sections. The Hortens did not. Their approach, while ingenious in some ways, revealed a lack of formal training and industrial process control, traits more common in experimental hobbyists than professional aerospace engineers. Cobbling together an aircraft. Because of material shortages and limited support, the Hortens were often forced to improvise with cast-off parts. The HO-IX's main landing gear came from a Messerschmitt Me 109, while the enormous nose wheel, nearly 5 feet in diameter, was repurposed from the tail wheel of a Heinkel He 177 Greif, a notoriously unreliable heavy bomber. Ironically, this accidental design quirk proved beneficial. The oversized nose wheel gave the HO-9 a 7-degree angle of incidence on the ground, which improved takeoff performance and eliminated the need for aggressive rotation during liftoff, a problem that had plagued earlier Horten gliders. Still, this improvement was more a product of luck than deliberate design. The British verdict. The Wilkinson Report. After the war, British aviation authorities examined several Horten designs, culminating in a detailed 60-page analysis known as the Wilkinson Report. Contrary to modern conspiracy theories, the report is measured, technical, and fair. It acknowledges the brothers' innovation, calling their work a remarkable record of progress in spite of many obstacles. It does, however, note the Hortens' lack of access to proper facilities, including wind tunnels and precision fabrication. British engineers at the time placed far more trust in wind tunnel testing than in the Hortens' flight data. Nonetheless, the report does not suggest any deliberate effort to suppress the Horten legacy, as has been speculated in conspiracy circles. A flying resume, not a warplane. One of the most intriguing aspects of Raymar Horten's wartime behavior is his focus on gliders, even in the final years of World War II. Some historians suggest that his real motive for developing the HO-229 wasn't military utility, but career advancement. In this interpretation, the jet-powered flying wing was less a weapon and more of a flying resume, a proof-of-concept designed to attract post-war job offers from the Allies. Indeed, Raymar tried to emigrate to the United States as early as 1938, but was denied an exit visa due to his access to classified Luftwaffe programs. Despite his Nazi Party membership and work as an assault glider instructor, Raymar's post-war ambitions were clear. He wanted to continue his career in the West. 1. The Northrop replica and radar stealth claims. Summary: Northrop Grumman's all-wood replica of the Horten jet omitted crucial components like metal fuel tanks, bombs, and engines. The team used carbon-impregnated glue to enhance radar absorption, but this doesn't fully replicate the original aircraft's mixed-material construction. Analysis: the suggestion that the Horten jet could have been a stealth bomber lacks solid historical or technical evidence. The post-war claim of radar-absorbing glue appears retrospective and opportunistic, made only after stealth technology had become publicly known. 2. The Horten's engineering shortcomings. Summary: the Horten brothers, especially Walter, were passionate but occasionally careless engineers. The misplaced center of gravity on the V2 prototype, due to a broken measuring tape, and repeated welding of the airframe during engine swaps show their inexperience in conventional aircraft production. Analysis: these oversights would be unacceptable in more rigorously managed programs. Their aircraft were innovative but not always practical or reliable. Using scavenged parts, like a bomber tail wheel as a nose wheel, also reflects the design-by-necessity nature of late-war German aviation. 3. British evaluation and the Wilkinson Report. Summary: contrary to conspiracy theories, the British report on the Hortens was measured and respectful, acknowledging their progress despite lacking resources like wind tunnels. However, it questioned the military utility of their work. Analysis: the conspiracy theories, while colorful, are not supported by the evidence. The British recognized the novelty but were rightly skeptical about real-world combat value. 4. Flying wing design, pros and cons. Advantages: eliminates non-lifting surfaces, fuselage, empennage, reducing drag. Enables span loading and efficient weight distribution. Can be stealthier due to fewer vertical surfaces. Disadvantages: inherently unstable, especially in yaw and pitch. Poor bombing accuracy due to Dutch roll, yaw/roll coupling. Difficult to adapt to multiple combat roles. Analysis: while the flying wing is conceptually elegant, its operational drawbacks, especially in the analog pre-fly-by-wire era, were significant. The instability doomed early attempts like the YB-49 as serious combat platforms. 5. The myth of the America bomber. Summary: the proposed HO-18 America bomber was a six-jet flying wing designed to reach the U.S. Its development never progressed. While some claim it was intended to deliver an atomic bomb, Germany lacked the resources and capability for such a weapon. Analysis: this concept mostly exists in the realm of Napkenwaffe, theoretical paper projects. At best, the plane might have carried a dirty bomb, but even that was speculative and likely unfeasible. 6. Post-war influence and conspiracies. Summary: the U.S. acquired various Horten designs and aircraft post-war, but Northrop had already been working on flying wing designs independently. Ads even claimed the Nazis copied U.S. concepts. Analysis: claims that Northrop stole Horten ideas ignore the fact that Jack Northrop was pioneering flying wings in the 1930s. The influence flowed both ways, but the innovation cannot be attributed solely to the Hortens. 7. The fate of the HO-9V3. Summary: the third prototype, HO-9V3, was brought to the U.S. but never flown. It deteriorated during long-term storage before being moved to the Smithsonian for preservation. Analysis: its journey reflects how wartime artifacts can be both prized and neglected. Despite its fame, the HO-9V3 was more historical curiosity than revolutionary technology. Thank you for reading this deep dive into the legend, myth, and reality behind the Horten flying wings, a revolutionary idea that soared ahead of its time, yet was weighed down by war, flawed execution, and post-war mystery. From makeshift components and design miscalculations to visionary aerodynamics and whispers of conspiracy, the story of the Horten brothers leaves us wondering what might have been if their dream had truly taken flight. But the story doesn't end there. Was the HO-9 simply a wartime curiosity? Or a glimpse into a future that governments have quietly pursued for decades? As restoration teams race against time to preserve what remains of the Horten legacy, the unanswered questions only deepen. If you love stories where history meets mystery, technology tangles with ideology, and myths echo through time, this is your channel. What do you think really crashed at Roswell? And could a forgotten wartime glider design have sparked the UFO craze? Subscribe to History Love for more fascinating episodes that blend fact, theory, and the unknown. Don't forget to like, comment, and ring the bell to stay updated on every twist in history's most gripping tales.